A record number of Americans are expected to vote by mail this year due to the pandemic, and election data from battleground states show Democrats are taking the lead when it comes to requesting absentee ballots. For more on what might be motivating them, let's bring in CBS News Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto. Hi there, Anthony. So more Democrats requested mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Florida than Republicans. What more can you tell us about who will be voting by mail on this election?
Hey, Elaine, that's right. One of the things we have seen in the polling throughout, which now the request numbers are starting to bear out, is that Democrats are more likely to say they'd prefer to vote by mail. Now, some of that stems from concern about coronavirus. Democrats have said they're more concerned about it throughout. Let me show you this from our latest national poll. First, the big top-level split among registered voters. People saying they want to vote in person on Election Day is just over a third at 37%. But then look at these larger numbers who say they either want to vote early in person, which you can do in many states. That's where you go in person to cast a ballot, but it's in advance of Election Day. States will set up those voting locations. And then by mail, or what we call absentee, and that's another third who say they want to do that. Now, the big difference in terms of partisanship, which you mentioned at the top, Elaine, this is just from the polling. Look at the percent of Democrats at half who say that they'd prefer to vote by mail this year, and compare that 14% to the Republicans who say that they'd prefer to vote by mail. Republicans more likely to say they'd vote in person on Election Day. Now, we have seen some of those patterns before in past elections, but this looks particularly dramatic. And I think as we get towards election night, knowing how many outstanding ballots there are from mail and how many outstanding ballots are left to be counted from in person may tell us the story in the way that all these states break down, Elaine.
Well, at this point, Anthony, is there any kind of indication in the numbers why Republicans and Democrats are taking such a different approach when it comes to voting this year?
Yeah, one is that concern I mentioned about coronavirus. We have seen in state after state Democrats saying that they're more concerned personally about getting it, and also, and this goes in accordance with saying that they want to vote by mail or vote early, also saying that they think that the outbreak is having a detrimental effect in their state. So that overarching concern is clearly tied up in this. One of the things that I think will be interesting to watch, though, is on the other side for Republicans, given the president's rhetoric and talking about voting by mail, I'm going to watch as we go forward if Republicans continue to say that they'd prefer to vote in person, and whether they equate that with the idea that perhaps voting by mail isn't for them or isn't the way to do things, and therefore are more reticent to do it. That, I think, will be a really interesting split, because look, in the past, it's not like Republicans have never voted by mail. The president has won states where the number of ballots, large numbers of ballots, are cast by mail or absentee. So it's not like Republicans haven't used it in the past. We'll see what happens this year.
Yeah, and it's interesting as well, Anthony, to hear the president try to delineate between the idea of absentee voting versus universal mail-in ballots, to try to kind of get folks to recognize that there's a difference. So we'll see. It'll be interesting, as you say, to see how it is that actually shakes out when it comes to the ballots turned in by Republicans. So we are seeing a lot of different polling these days, Anthony. For example, an NBC Marist poll out today shows Joe Biden up 9 points in Pennsylvania, but a Monmouth poll published just a week ago showed Biden with only a 4-point edge there. So what do our viewers need to know or keep in mind about such a varied response?
So the first takeaway there is that story isn't dramatically different, right? If you're talking about two Pennsylvania polls, that difference could be sampling, or it could be how they do likely voter models, which is decide who they think is likely to show up. You really want to look at numbers in all polls and not take each one as this received truth, okay? 4, 5, 6 points, whatever it is. First, you know that there's sampling error around all of that, but also get the general sense of the story. So if I take you to the map, for example, and I have Pennsylvania leaning towards Joe Biden, and both of those polls say that Pennsylvania is essentially leaning towards Joe Biden. We have a broader story, okay? Pennsylvania is leaning towards Joe Biden. And that point-by-point shift isn't really that dramatic. Polls can get within a couple of points of the true value, but, you know, let's not go overboard with taking each particular point. And I think that's one of the big things we pollsters need to continue to communicate.
Some very wise counsel, Anthony Salvanto. Thank you so much, Anthony. Great to see you.
Sure.